All right, today we're going to talk about nationalism and a lot of the things that happened after WW1, the Great War. Some people called it the war to end all wars. Unfortunately, it was not the war that ended all wars. And then later this week, we have World War II to talk about. So we got lots of stuff coming down the pike. Well, the Europeans, as you remember, especially the British and others, controlled a lot of territory. That's going to be weakened with, well, both wars, but World War I will weaken the colonial rule. It'll also give rise then to nationalism in these countries that had been controlled by European powers. So after World War I, colonialism is increasingly protested in colonies. And of course, we're going to pick India as our example. And a lot of stuff that happens there, similar things happen elsewhere. Primarily, the people who are protesting these things are the upper middle class, the upper crust of local society, the ones who had gone off. Remember we said those who were the elite, knew English and all that sort of like went off to Oxford or Cambridge or someplace and studied. And when they came back home, they sort of worked for the colonial government. But they're the ones who are going to be protesting these things, the ones who are going to be pushing for most of these changes. Because to be quite honest, they're the ones that had the most to win from this. Because if they kicked out the English, guess what? They're probably the people who are going to be running everything. Right? So, several who were of middle class who couldn't go to, say, overseas, go to, like, say, England to study or France, they would study at Western-style schools in their own country, like, say, India. And they would learn about democracy. They would learn about freedoms. They would learn about things like the American Revolution, putting off British rule, and things that had happened in South America and so forth. And so many of them get the idea, why can't we do something similar? Why can't we be independent of the European power, Britain, France, or whoever? Because they learn about it, but they don't experience it. The other thing, of course, that fuels a lot of this is the colonial rulers are often they're quite racist in their approach. They believe that the local people just couldn't handle these things. Perhaps they couldn't deal with it. That they need the European power to sort of make everything happen, and other things like that. And so this also fuels this nationalism and fuels this idea. So there comes calls for change. For example, in Burma or Thakhin, you can see it located on the map in the upper left. The area that's darkened in, that's where it is. Not far from India, not far from China, kind of in between the two. And then this other map is an inset of it here. What they wanted was, they were mostly Buddhists, and they wanted Buddhism to be accepted. The British, when they came in, they brought with them Christianity. In particular, the Anglican Church, the Anglican faith, right? What we call in the United States Episcopalians. But by 1930, there were also calls for independence from Britain. They wanted to be their own country. Okay, this is just one example of nationalism in these colonial areas. Now, there are also calls for change elsewhere. In the Dutch East Indies, probably haven't heard of the Dutch East Indies because it doesn't really exist now, but you probably have heard of Indonesia. Indonesia was controlled by the Dutch, and at the time they called it the Dutch East Indies. Now, the religion there, of course, was Islam, a particular brand of Islam, Sarakat Islam. And so what they wanted was for Islam to be accepted. Again, the Dutch were Christian in faith, Protestant primarily. And so the locals began to organize Muslim merchants. They actually formed a political party in the 1920s. This organization of Muslim merchants becomes the Nationalist Party of Indonesia. But it's not going to have any success to take over until after World War II. So a lot of the things that really get started in World War I have some limited success, but really that process is not completed until after World War II. Because the Europeans had so much to deal with World War I, and then immediately get involved in World War II. This is what prompts the end of much of the colonialism. All right, most people could agree, most locals said, well, yeah, I guess we would like some changes. But not everybody agreed on how those changes, what those changes should be, and how those changes should happen, right? So for example, one question would be, should we do this gradually or should we do it quickly, right? If you're going to change the government, if you're going to get rid of the, say, the British or the Dutch, how quickly do we do that? We get rid of them in 6 months, 6 years? What's the best thing? Is it better to let things transition out more slowly? Or do we just need to do it all at once? And not everybody agreed with that. And if we do change, right, if we are going to make changes, how much change are we going to make? Let's say we get rid of the British or the Dutch. Are we going to get rid of all Western ideas and become very traditional? Or are we going to retain a Western-style government, except have it run by us? Okay? Another thing was, it had to do with what we might call modernization. Do we modernize? And so this also sort of had influence on these other questions. If you wanted to modernize, it might be better to do this slower because you could get more help modernizing and make everybody trained in all the new things before you just like for example, there's all these machines here and we don't really know how to run it and we don't know how to really do some of the stuff. We kick everybody out that knows. What are we going to do with that stuff? See? So are we going to be very traditional or Western? Are we going to be modern, or just all we want is independence? Okay, so these are sort of issues. Now, the people that are really pushing for this change, this is not a sort of power from the people, uprising of the peasants. This is the elite pushing for the change. These are the ones who have received an education, usually in the home country of the colonial power, say in England or France, someplace like that. And they often have much in common with the Europeans, perhaps more so than they have in common with the peasants of their own country. Does that make sense? You know, because they have gotten this Western style education, they are dressing in Western style clothes, they are doing Western style jobs, they have Western style ideas about how things ought to run, whereas a lot of the peasants don't have any of that and maybe don't care about a lot of that. So I think once this begins, the people who are pushing for the change sometimes are surprised by how much change some people want that they don't want. They basically want to get rid of the British and sort of replace the British with them. Let's leave everything else pretty much intact. That's not what some other people had in mind. They wanted a real upheaval. Well, let's use India as our example. We've kind of already been alluding to India anyway. But they're a good one to choose because remember, they're considered to be the crown and the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. The jewel in the crown. And, they're very populous, very large, and a very important colony for the British. Well, most of the nationalists, the ones who are really pushing for this political change, are the educated upper class locals, people from India who have gone to England, gone to Oxford, gone to Cambridge and so forth. They've studied there and they've come back home and most of them live in big cities like Bombay, Madras, or Calcutta. And they want to get rid of the British, but here's the thing. They would like to do more modernization before they get independence. Why? Well, because modernization takes money and takes maybe know-how, connections, and the British have a lot of that. Why don't we just sort of let the British keep running things for a while until they modernize things for us, then we'll kick them out. If we kick them out right now, we got a lot of modernization to do. That's going to be hard and expensive for us to do. So, why not let them do it? It's kind of like, let's say there's a person who has a special someone. They're not really that special anymore. And it's coming up to like Valentine's Day or Christmas or something. They say, I could dump this dude right now, or I could wait till after Christmas. And, he kind of knows things aren't going well. He'd probably buy me a real nice gift. And once I get the good stuff, then I dump him. I don't buy him anything. See? Or it could be a guy. Oh, I shouldn't have made it. I made it the lady, didn't I? Sorry. A person. Okay, so that's kind of what it is. Let's keep this relationship going a little longer, knowing that we're going to get out of it as soon as we're ready. And we're already kind of ready, but let's let them build a little more infrastructure, modernize things a little more, get that railroad done, get that harbor done, whatever else it is. Then, all right, then we get rid of them. Then we can sort of have the benefit of the changes, and we get rid of the British. Now, not everyone agreed with that approach. Well, a guy named Gopal Gokhale will push the British to make changes. And basically, it's sort of the leverage like, people are not happy. We need to make these changes. We need to do these things. And so the British did make some of the changes. It brought about some of the changes. And so this is just one of the concerns that maybe wouldn't, appear to you immediately. Don't want to get out too soon. Take it slow. Now, other people are like, we got to get these British out right now. And we're going to take over. We're going to do it our way. Forget that British way. Forget that Western stuff. Okay. So there it is. Now here's just a map, a little reminder of the way India was kind of pieced together by the British into India, just so you get the idea how big India was and when these different parts came into play. Again, not asking you to reproduce this on a test or anything, but just to let you know, it wasn't just sort of all or nothing. It was done in pieces. You got Delhi, you got Calcutta. They don't show Bombay, but Bombay is right in here. So those are the big cities. Madras is down here. So, okay. But it's a sizable chunk. India is much bigger than probably what most of us realize. It's quite large country. It's a subcontinent all to itself. All right, this will finally give birth to a movement that's called the INC, or the India National Congress. The India National Congress. It actually begins in 1880, so some 40 years before the period we're talking about, right? It's long before World War I. This is called for self-rule. And by that means that people from India would rule India instead of the British ruling India, all right, just to be clear. But the things that they try to do are often, as you might imagine, sabotaged by the British, countered by them, curtailed by them. And they make some small progresses, but not a lot. And by 1885, some of them are tired of this, and that is when this Congress begins. So people who are calling for reform, let's say as early as 1880, keep being countered and countered and countered. So in 1885, they actually start the INC, the India National Congress. Now, who starts this and who are members of it? Again, it's all the very upper caste, the upper crust of society. They are English-trained Hindus, not Muslims. Muslims are a large minority in India, but the Hindus do not accept them as, well, eventually, they won't accept them even at all in India. But not at first. The Muslims and the Hindus are together in India. This is what Gandhi wanted to do. He wanted to try to keep them all together. This is the kind of stuff when Gandhi would say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Jew or whatever, I'm everything. So the idea here is he wanted to try to keep all the people of India together, what we might call a big tent. But there was so much tension between Muslims and Hindus that we'll see after independence comes, they can't keep it together. And in fact, the high concentration of Muslim areas, which were on the east side and the west side, kind of northeast and northwest, will separate out into separate countries. First called East and West Pakistan, and now today called Bangladesh and Pakistan. So Bangladesh and Pakistan were a part of India at this time. But they had a Muslim majority, and so finally they said, if you're a Muslim, go to Pakistan. If you're a Hindu in that area, come here, or live with it because we're dividing. So that can't be kept out. But, so here we see high caste, that is wealthy and well-educated, English-trained Hindus formed the Indian National Congress. They wanted economic development by the British, well, by them too, but they wanted very Western, they had a very Western view of what India should be. Well, there were some slow changes that came, some concessions by the British. Some INC members became more radicalized. And so there'll actually be a split in the INC because some of the people in the INC felt like the other people in the INC are just too wishy-washy, right? Too slow to call for change. We want change and we want it now. So there's a split between the Balwatro Tillich separates from the INC. These are the more radical ones. And they're so radical that many of them are rounded up, arrested, put into prison. Charges of sedition. What is sedition? Anybody know? If you got charged, have you ever been charged with sedition? Probably not. It's like, people, when I apply for a job, they often have on there, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And so when they ask me that, I go, convicted? No, never convicted. And that makes them a little nervous. But it's true. I've never been convicted of a felony. So sedition means you're trying to overthrow the government, basically. Could have some other nuances, but that's basically it. You want to overthrow the government, so that's usually called sedition. So, yeah?
They're charged for trying to do a coup, is it called?
Yeah, it could be, a coup, a revolution. A coup is usually a kind of military takeover. I don't know if they were militarized, but they were trying to oust the government and put another government in. So, we could call them terrorists. It depends on your perspective. Whatever it is, it's not, usually the current government frowns upon anyone trying to get rid of them. So they like to lock those people up. Like George Washington. If George Washington would have been captured or lost the war, he would have been charged with sedition. He was trying to overthrow the government here in here in America and get rid of the British. That was not acceptable to the British. Hence the war. Well, anyway, enter now a guy that I know you've heard about, Mohandas Gandhi, or Mahatma, he will be called later on. 1869 to 1948. Gandhi. So here is a little, I don't know where I found this, somewhere on the inner recesses of the interwebs. I found this little picture showing Gandhi at different parts of his life. Down here when he's just a baby Gandhi, that's my favorite time of his life. And then young guy, young whippersnapper Gandhi, ambitious lawyer Gandhi. He studies in England. He studies to be a lawyer. Anyway, I think we got some of this here. He was born in the western part of India. And he's not poor. He's not born into poverty or anything like that, as some might think. He was actually born the son of a government minister. He lived a privileged life. He went off to London and he studied law. That's down in this sort of third picture up. Him with the little mustache and the dark hair. And that's him probably soon after he became a lawyer. Then he gets an assignment, a job, and he goes to South Africa, where he works with Indian immigrants, that is, people from India who have immigrated into South Africa, helping them with their legal problems, other things like that. And of course, there he saw a lot of discrimination in South Africa of the people from India, which I guess emboldened him to try to do something about it back home. Okay? So by 1913, then, he leaves South Africa and he goes to India and he joins in, he works with the INC, the Indian National Congress. But of course, the thing which he is noted for, there are different ways of protesting, different ways of trying to bring about change. You can try legislative action, you can try grassroots measures. Here in the United States, you could try it through elections and voting. So, if you want to change something, there are ways to change things, but they might take some time. Maybe they won't be successful, but you could try to change the law. You could try to change your representative, try to get laws and bills introduced. Now, for some people, they don't think that's viable. And so they will use other kind of protest methods, right? But what Gandhi, of course, becomes famous for is the use of nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance. So what would this be? Well, I don't know. I don't like to give you any ideas, but it's basically where you resist, but you don't hit anybody, you don't hurt anybody. That's just basically it. So you might go in and resist and have a club and, like a fist, beat people up or whatever in the streets and protest that way very violently. Well, what he's saying, you should do it non-violently. And in fact, to be quite honest, what he's trying to do is provoke other people to get violent with his group. I think that's a fair assessment. So in other words, like we go up and, here's these people that are going to oppose us, and we go right in their face, and we're just right there, and then we just kind of hope they hit us. And then we use that. We shouldn't hit them back, but we use the fact that they beat us up to show their racism or their fascism, or whatever it is. Show how they are unreasonable and we are just peaceful. That's sort of the goal. Okay? So that's nonviolent resistance. There's a guy here in the United States who learns a lot of this from Gandhi. Anybody know who he is? It gets used here in the United States. Martin Luther King Jr., definitely. He studied the ideas of Gandhi. Because, there were those who were fighting for civil rights in the 60s who wanted to be very violent. People like Malcolm X and some other people like that wanted to use sort of violence and threats, beating people up or burning stuff down, blowing things up or whatever. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, no, we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to march. Like we're going to march over that bridge in Selma, where basically they tell us we shouldn't march, but we're going to march anyway. And we're not going to take clubs, and we're not going to take weapons, and we're just going to march. And when the police encounter us and the police get angry and they start beating us up, well, people are going to see that, and then we're going to gain support. Okay? So if you want to know where Martin Luther King Jr. picked up a lot of these ideas, you read his writings. He says he's reading, he's inspired by what Gandhi did. Okay. Well, Gandhi wanted to push the British to improve conditions, especially for the poor, like you see here in India. And of course, he wanted the British to grant independence. This is what the INC and Gandhi are working for. Gandhi reached out to the so-called untouchables. These are the people that are the outcasts, the people that are below the caste system, the people that really you're not supposed to associate with. You're not supposed to eat with them. You're not supposed to sort of really be around them, be in their houses or anything like that. They are supposed to stay separate from the rest of the people. And so Gandhi makes a point to reach out to them. He called them the Harijan, or the children of God. Okay? So this is one of his ways of making a point that all the people of India are in this together, not just the upper class, but those at the very bottom as well. Okay? So he reaches out to them. Another thing that's Gandhi going to do, he's going to do as a form of protest, are the clothes that he wears. If we go back to this poster here of him, or whatever this is, this drawing, notice he's wearing Western-style clothes here at the bottom left. And then you start to see his clothing change, all right? He's wearing local cloth, and in fact, he's wearing what is called a homespun clothing. That is, and Gandhi even learns how to spin. So this is part of the way the British held power, economic power, and that sort of thing over them, was through this homespun cloth. That means this is cloth which the people of India produce themselves, and it's not going through the British economic system. So he will begin to push everyone to do this. This is the way the British would make their money. They came and got the cotton from India. They shipped the cotton back to England. They then manufactured it in the cloth and clothing, and then from there they would sell it back to the people in India. And so the British made the profit. And they cut out all the homespun kind of cloth because it was fashionable to wear the British stuff. And so Gandhi said, look, we got to stop doing that. That's just feeding right into the British economy and everything. And it says that we are accepting of them when we wear their clothing. So I want everybody to wear local cloth, stuff that you spin right in your house, the old-fashioned way, the way we used to do it. So this is his protest, really, against the British textiles and textile imports. Gandhi will be given a title, the Great Soul. So he will sometimes then be called Mahatma Gandhi. This is a kind of a title, honorific title of Gandhi. So he kept calling for nonviolent protest, but in 1919, Indian protesters killed some British. And in response, then the British killed many of the protesters. This is exactly the kind of thing Gandhi did not want to happen. You see, because if they got violent and they killed people, and then the British responded by killing people, well, what does that say? That just says, well, the British are justified. Because you're so violent, you're killing people, we had to stop you from killing people. And if some of you die in the process, well, that's what happens. But if you just go and just walk, march, whatever, sit, and they get so upset with you that they start to beat you and might even kill some of you, then no one's going to say that they were justified in that. And that's when you actually begin to gain the power over a more powerful force. The British had a much more powerful military, no doubt about it. However, the people of India were millions of people, more than what the British could control, really. Well, eventually, because this happens, it gets traced back to Gandhi. Even though Gandhi did not tell these people to be violent, Gandhi had You could say he had inspired them to protest, right? This is called inciting a riot. If I was in this class and I began to tell you that you needed to go out and you needed to do, protest, and you needed to burn stuff down, whatever, and I got you all worked up and you went out of here and you did some of that stuff, even though I didn't do any of it, I would be blamed. Because I inspired you. I incited you to violence. So if I was seen as the leader of this group that then went and did violence, well, I would get charged. And that's what happens to Gandhi. Gandhi gets arrested. He ends up spending several years in prison. That's the reason why. Because even though he told people to be nonviolent, some of them were not always that way. I did get to visit India a few years ago, and I did go to the residence, one of the residence of Gandhi in Mumbai, or Mumbai. So it was interesting to see this house, and I think that's what's reminding me of it. This looks like the front of that place where he lived for many years. Well, Gandhi was a Hindu, but he also called himself a universalist. He one time said that he was a Hindu and that he was a Christian and that he was a Muslim. Okay, a universalist in that form. So religiously, he's a bit amorphous, but very politically, he's very much pushing for local rule. In 1921, there's an act passed, the India Act, which basically said that the people of India had to be or would be more involved in the government of India. Now, others within the INC were pushing for full independence. Motilal Nehru will push for full independence. It's not going to come yet, of course, but this just shows the tensions. Some things are changing. Some people want a lot more change. The problems that come. But remember, this fight goes on for, almost 30 years before there's independence. Well, this leads us to another event within Gandhi's life. It's called the salt tax. One of the things that had happened to the British, of course, with all these protests and all these changes, people wearing local cloth and so forth, the British had lost some of their income from England. England had lost income from India. And so we see that one of the things they want to try to do is increase that, build back some of their revenue by taxes. By the way, just a reminder here, governments only get money from one source. Do you know what that source is? You. Some people think the government just has money. They just got all this money and they're just going to spend all this money. No, the government only gets money one way, by taxing people in various ways. And sometimes they get very creative in the kind of taxes they come up with. For example, when you go buy a gallon of gasoline, I don't know what it is exactly here in Florida because there's local tax, there's state tax, and there's federal tax. But for every gallon of gasoline you buy, you're spending about 30 cents that you're giving straight to the government, the federal government. And then probably as much as another 20 to 30 cents is going to state and local government. So that means that 50 to 60 cents of every, if they gave the gasoline away to you, you'd still be paying 60 cents a gallon, is what it is. But they hide it. They hide it in the price of the gas. So you don't even think about the fact that you're paying. Like, that's the one thing you go and buy and they don't charge you sales tax, right? Oh, that's great. I go and buy this gas, there's no tax. Well, yeah, there's a lot of tax. Or how about this? Go and buy tires for your car. Let's say that tire costs you $70 or something. Built into that are several taxes, into that $70 or $80, whatever you're paying. I would say probably at least $10 of it or more is tax. There's a road tax. There's a tire, what do they call it? Tire, forgot how they word it. Disposal tax. In other words, someday you're going to have to get rid of that tire, and so they charge you the tax for getting rid of the tire when you buy the tire. That theoretically the government is then going to use that money, they're not, but they're going to use that money to then take care of old tires. There's a road tax, a tire disposal tax, there might be some other, and plus on top of that, when you buy tires, sales tax. So they're actually taxing the tax. You think about it, if the tire costs you $70 and 10 of it is tax, they charge you tax on $70. So they're charging you tax on $10 a tax. Don't think about it. It's best not to think about it. What I'm saying is governments get very, very good, very, very sneaky at times on the kind of taxes that they charge you, that you sometimes don't even realize all the taxes that you're paying. You just think, oh, well, they take some out of my paycheck, which, by the way, they do. They take a lot out of your paycheck. Or, well, I go to the store, I have to pay a sales tax. But there's lots of other taxes that you pay that are built into the cost of things that you don't even probably, it's probably you don't want to know because it just would make you probably upset. But you are paying taxes, sometimes taxes on taxes. And so this is one that the British came up with. It was a new one. And it's basically trying to make up for the fact that they're losing revenue because the people from India are not buying British clothing, which would have had income for Britain and tax money, extra income for them. So we're going to do that with salt. Basically, the colony, the government, the colonial government of India says you can only buy salt from the government, and we're going to set the price and it's going to be a high tax. Everybody needs salt, especially in a country like India. Trust me, it's very, very hot in India. Florida's hot, but India's hotter. And so you're going to sweat a lot. And if you don't have any salt, if you don't take in any salt, you're going to be in big trouble in a short amount of time in India. So it was prohibited then for people of India to try to produce their own salt. They had to buy salt from the colonial government, and the colonial government set the price, and included in that was a very high tax. Well, this is something that, Gandhi said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to march to the sea and make our own salt. By the way, that probably would be very good salt. But again, it was a protest. So these people start marching down to the ocean. They're going to take the ocean water, and they're going to maybe build a fire and try to heat it up and get the salts out of it, and then they were going to use that salt. So it was an act of protest. The government knew it was an act of protest. They ended up marching 240 miles, right? Gaining people along the way. And when he got down to the sea, he picked up a piece of salt and, got him into more trouble. He got arrested again, put into prison. Part of what he would do while he was in prison is he would protest in prison. How would he protest? A hunger strike. They would bring him food. He refused to eat the food. When the news gets out, Gandhi is starving to death in prison. See, doesn't sound very good for the government. Then why are you allowing this guy to do it? And so this is something that people have done. I don't know if Gandhi was the absolute first person to do it, but he certainly popularized it. So, the next time you're imprisoned and you think it's for the wrong reasons, you might try that, a hunger strike. See, I don't know how well it would work in the United States. They might just say, well, okay. You don't want to eat, you don't want to eat. But in fact, what they do sometimes, this has happened in more recent times, with people who are sort of political, like people at Guantanamo Bay or people in other sort of places where they're being held, and they will go on a hunger strike. And sometimes the people that run the prison come in and forcibly feed them. Put a tube down their throat and force some food down them, or give them an IV or something, you know. Anyway, eventually Gandhi is assassinated. You might think, well, was he assassinated by the British? Was he assassinated by the Muslims? No, he was assassinated by a Hindu. Why? Because this Hindu believed that Gandhi wasn't really being Hindu enough, I guess. That he was, saying that he was a Muslim and a Christian, and that he was trying, he was breaking the rules, maybe, going to see the untouchables, where really a good Hindu should not do that kind of thing. So in 1948, Gandhi is actually assassinated as he's walking down the street. He's in a crowd of people, and a guy just comes up and it turns out it's not anybody British. It's not anybody who's a Muslim that you might. There were tensions with the Muslims. No, it was a Hindu. In January of 1948. Now, another leader who's important in India is Nehru. This guy, Jawaharlal Nehru, is the son of the guy we already talked about, Motilal Nehru. He too is a wealthy, educated, upper crust. He is Brahmin, his caste. That's the highest caste that there is. He's educated in Britain. He is Muslim, but he's really quite secular in his approach. He was raised a Muslim, but he's, I take that back. He was raised as a Hindu, but he really has a secular approach. Rational, he's very intellectual. And so within the INC, there are two major groups. Two major groups. There are the religious, and then there are the secular. And he was a part of the secular part. Okay. By the way, he will later go on once, again, a spoiler alert, once India does get its independence, which it does, he will be the first prime minister of India. Now, here's where I want to talk about Muslims versus Hindus. This is another problem. The Muslims, of course, also would like to see independence of India, but they are troubled that all the people who are running this process, all of the leaders of like the INC, religious or secular, they are all really from Hindu backgrounds. And so they form in 1930 their own group called the Muslim League. And they're calling for a Muslim state of Pakistan. Pakistan, by the way, means land of the pure. Stan, by the way, means land. So Pakistan means the pure land, or the land of the pure. And of course, you've heard of Pakistan, or Pakistan, if you want to say it that way. There are two main areas of India: the northwest, and that's the part you see on the map here, and then the northeast, that have a large Muslim population. And so we'll see then that the Hindus and the Muslims will eventually gain independence in 1949, but they cannot hold it together. And in fact, violence breaks out between Hindus and Muslims even before this. And eventually, they divide the nation into two parts, East and West Pakistan and India. And then eventually, East and West Pakistan decide they're so far apart, so much distance between them, they form two separate Muslim states. And they changed the name of one to Bangladesh. And that is in the north east, and Pakistan, the northwest. Okay. Any questions about that?